לכל זמן ועת בכל חפץ תחת השמיים, עת ללדת ועת למות, עת לבכות ועת לשחוק, עת ספוד ועת לרקוד, עת לבקש ועת לאבד. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for birthing, a time for dying, a time for weeping, a time for laughing, a time for wailing, a time for dancing, a time for seeking, and a time for losing. Until this moment, you've all been arranging and calling and texting and making decisions. And now it's time to sit and mourn, and to allow this funeral experience to provide you with a space to mourn and a space to be comforted. Our condolences go out to all of Martin's special family who are here in mourning, and to all of us who knew this special and kind man. He's survived by Barbara, his devoted wife, for 55 years. His children, Gitta and Herbert Weinberg and Barry and Gabi Gelman. He was beloved by his grandchildren, Rachel and Ari Steining, Rena, Maya, and Avery Weinberg, Sam Gelman and Dina Katz, Lily, Benjamin, Ellie, and Ami, and his great-granddaughter, Menucha Steinig. One thing to note is there's a lot of menucha happening in your family. And so we offer our condolences. Vador, 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 Vador. We begin our process of providing the mourners with comfort with Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i l'chsar, binot deshiar bitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit samavet, lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Shiftecha umishantecha hema yanachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan neged sorerai. Dishantav Hashem and Roshi, Kosi, Rivaya, Ach Tov v'chesed, Yurdefuni kol yemei chayai, V'shavti b'beit Adonai le'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runs over. Friends, we first invite Representative Lawrence of the Hebrew Order of David.
I respectfully request all members of the Hebrew Order of David International from both lodges, Galil and Tekva, please rise in your places. Brethren, to order. Brethren all, we meet on this sad occasion to pay our last respects to our beloved Martin Gelman. Our brother Marty was a devoted member of Lodge Galil here in Houston, and in his lifetime he observed the precept of V'ahavtecha l'reacha kamocha, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. This precept is the highest ideal of the Hebrew Order of David International, which we constantly strive to uphold. Brother Marty assisted in the ideals for which our noble order exists, to practice brotherly love, the unity of Jewry, and charity towards all men. To our brother's family, we extend our deep and abiding sympathy and fraternal condolences. Their sad loss is borne by all our brethren. May we who survive our beloved brother endeavor to uphold the principles which he held so dear, and may we in turn make our contribution to the realization of the aims of the Hebrew Order of David International. May the memory of our departed brother be a blessing and an inspiration to all. Adonai Natan, Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mavarach, Me'ata ve'ad olam. The Lord hath given, the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord forever and ever. Amen. Thank you.
As we continue with grandchildren, Maya, Lily, and then Ellie.
I feel very lucky to have had my Zadie for 20 years. Zadie was truly a phenomenal grandfather. I could not have asked for anyone better. Zadie was always kind. Zadie was always supportive. And Zadie always made you feel like you were so cared for and unconditionally loved. Every new piece of information I told him was the most interesting piece of information in the world. Every opinion I had was so smart and newfound. Every mistake I made was no problem. It would be impossible to not feel loved around my Zadie. The memories my siblings and I have with Zadie, we will cherish. Some of the most special memories are from when my siblings and I would visit Houston. It was quality time with our Bubby and Zadie that we are so lucky to have had. Bubby and Zadie would plan elaborate day trips and even overnight trips, and do everything in their power to keep up with us running around. Even if it was difficult for Zadie to walk around the zoo or sit on the beach in Galveston, he would always come just to make those around him happy. I think that encapsulates my Zadie pretty well. While being in Israel for the year and a worldwide pandemic, a lot of my relationship with Bubby and Zadie has been over the phone this last year. Zadie always appreciated a Friday pre-Shabbos phone call or a surprise midweek FaceTime, but he never made you feel bad if you forgot. But what is really special about Zadie is how he ended every phone call. One of my last phone calls, where I was lucky enough to hear Zadie's trademark ending to the call, I wrote down his exact quote. I don't know exactly why I wrote it down, but I'm really glad I did. Whatever you do, I support you. Be safe and have a good time. I love you. I will, Zadie. I love you and I miss you.
Hi, everyone. For those who may not know me, my name is Lily, and I'm one of Martin Gelman's granddaughters. I just want to start by thanking everybody for coming. I always thought that when my grandparents moved here a little while ago, it was pretty risky moving from their friends and their home in New York. So it's really comforting to see so many familiar faces and know that they found a loving community here. My grandfather was a man of few words. My siblings and I would always compete to see who could keep Zadie on the phone the longest. My record was 90 seconds. And the conversation usually went something like this. Hi, Lily, how are you? How's Washington? Okay, well, be safe. I love you, bye. I'll always think about those brief conversations and smile, but not only because of the inside joke between my brothers and I, but because I know that behind those short phone calls, there was endless love. I think Zadie was his grandkids' biggest fan. The only person he may have loved more than his grandchildren is his great-granddaughter, Menucha. Once she was born, none of us ever stood a chance. But Zadie never missed an opportunity to show us that he was following our lives and successes. I think he is probably one of the only people who read every single article I ever published, and he never failed to text me right after it went up online, "Great article, keep up the good work." I know that Zadie used to save photos of all the grandkids to individual albums on his iPad. He would get them off Facebook if we sent them to him on WhatsApp, and even if they had nothing to do with him, like me and all of my friends in Washington, he would save it, I think, just because it made him happy to see us happy. One of the last memories that I have with my grandfather is from the Passover Seder in 2021. We were sitting across from each other, and I made some inappropriate comment at the table, which is my usual MO. And my grandfather gave me this look, this little knowing look with a wry smile, and he didn't say it, but I could tell that he was thinking, "Lily, this is not the time for that," but it was really funny. And I think that that's how my grandfather showed his love for us. It was those unspoken looks and brief texts and short phone calls. And if you didn't know him, you wouldn't necessarily be able to see it. But all of us in our family and anyone who knew him well would know that those small gestures came from a place of really deep affection. So, Zadie, I love you, and I'll miss you, and I'll carry your love with me wherever I go.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming here. It means a lot to me and my family. And I just wanted to share 2 quick stories about my Zadie. After we flooded, me and my family lived in the same apartment as Bubby and Zadie. Every single Sunday, I would go downstairs to their apartment, turn the TV on, and watch the Texans game. At the time, Zadie was not a big football fan. So for the first few weeks of me watching in his apartment, he was not very interested with watching with me. But one Sunday, Zadie sat down next to me on the couch and started watching the game with me. Zadie started asking me questions about the game, which teams were playing, who I was rooting for, and asking me to explain what had just happened in the previous play. Zadie watching with me became an every week thing. Early Sunday afternoon, I would come down at 12 p.m., and Zadie and I would watch the games till around 7 p.m. Zadie and I watched so much football together that he even started following my fantasy football games. Zadie would ask me every week how my players performed and if I had won my matchup that week. Zadie started watching not only football, but basketball and baseball. We'd watch every Rockets playoff game and watch the Astros when they were in the World Series. For games when I was not able to come downstairs and watch with Zadie, he always made sure to text me and let me know that he was watching and who had won that game. This past year, I joined my high school basketball team. Sadly, Zadie was never able to see me play in person and was only able to watch some of the games through a live stream. While he couldn't be there in person to watch me play, almost every game, Zadie called me to wish me good luck and apologized that he was not able to watch. During that time, I knew Zadie was having a hard time at 7 Acres, but he still made sure to call me before every game. Even though he could not watch the game, Zadie always made an effort to show his support for me. Thank you, Zadie, for always being there for me. I love you, and I'll miss you.
We continue with Martin's children.
I would like to thank the Houston community for taking care of my dad and helping my mother and brother while I was in Boston. My dad was a truly unique man of many facets. He personified Kibbud Av V'Em as long as I can remember. When my dad had cancer, he never told his father, since it would only cause pain and suffering to his father. Growing up, Barry and I knew he was always on our side. Later on, when I brought the kids over to meet him, he would have a look of only joy. Above all, he was devoted to my mom and put her number one. He lived to see 9 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. 2 grandchildren married. I ask of you, the way to honor my dad is to love and hug your partner and kiss your children. That's the way my dad would want it. Thank you, and rest, Zadie.
Thank you, Gitta.
My father was a man of few words. I am not. This is just a fair warning. I remember when I was learning Masechet Chulin at Yeshiva University, statements by Mar Ukva and Shmuel. Ana lahamilta chala bar chamra legabe Abba. I am, with regard to this matter, like vinegar the son of wine, compared to my father. This means that Mar Ukva and Shmuel felt that their practices were inferior to those of their father. I have a distinct memory from so many years ago calculating in my mind when I first read that passage all the ways that my father was superior to me, all the ways in which he excelled. I should be clear, he never imposed himself on anyone, quite the opposite, just that certain qualities stood out. And I can say now with certainty that the list has only grown since those days at yeshiva. So here are a few aspects of life where I have no choice but to say, Anna laha milta chala bar chamra legabe Abba. My father was a rodef shalom. He sought after peace. He never wanted anyone to fight and wanted everyone to get along. There are many stories I can tell, but I'll just share two of them. On the morning of Gabi's and my wedding, just a few hours before it was supposed to start, it occurred to me that all the Sheva brachot were given out to family members, and there was no bracha for my father. I said to him, I really want you to have a bracha under the chuppah. Why can't you just remove one family member and put yourself in their place? My father sat me down. I remember exactly where this took place, in my parents' bedroom. They had a little nook where there was a desk and a chair, and he sat me down at the chair, and he explained to me why it was important that each and every person on that list have a blessing, have a bracha under the chuppah, and why it was important that each one of them be honored. And he insisted, because he wanted to make peace, that he not get a bracha. This is also a story about humility. Since we announced his passing, I've received countless messages, with many of them highlighting my father's humility. He was not one to claim the limelight and always preferred to be behind the scenes. The other story is more of a family epic than a story. For those of you who know my mother, may she live and be well, you know that she has an outgoing personality. My mother-in-law, may she live and be well, is equally outspoken. Well, as you can imagine, this led to some interesting and sometimes heated mealtime conversations. Yesterday, my mother-in-law, Gabi's mother, called to extend her condolences and shared with me how my father was the one who would try to get everyone to just calm down at the table and not fight and get along. And she would hear my father whisper to my mother about my mother-in-law, just let her talk, just let her talk. My father was a really hard worker. As I thought about his professional life, it occurred to me that I could not think of another one of my friends' fathers who did not have an office. Some of my friends' fathers were doctors, some lawyers, some accountants, some teachers, but they all had a place where they worked. My father worked from his car. He was the original Lincoln lawyer, although he wasn't a lawyer, and he didn't drive a Lincoln. He was a salesperson for a Spanish food company called Vitaros, and he would go from store to store, to Queens, to Brooklyn, to the Bronx, and he would go in and count how much product was left on the shelves, how much was in the back room, and then talk to the manager about how much he should order for them. He would then come home and either call the orders in or in later years, fax the orders in. And this was really hard, physical, demanding work. And he did this in the scorching heat and in the freezing cold, and I know because I used to go to work with him. You can't imagine how many miles he logged each and every week. And he would come home from work physically exhausted, just totally spent. And I learned many things from those days going to work with my dad. I learned how to drink scalding hot coffee while driving without a lid on the cup. I learned how to prop up a writing pad on a steering wheel while driving to jot down some notes. I learned just how to place the cardboard boxes under the tires to get out of a snowbank. And I learned that my father was blessed by the parking angels. No matter how busy, no matter how many cars were double parked, my father always found a parking spot. It was amazing. And I saw my father treat his clients with respect, and in turn, I saw how they all loved him. My father always had a few bottles of Johnny Walker in his trunk. He was not a drinker. And I asked him one day when I was going to work with him, "Why do you have this?" And he said, holiday gifts, birthday gifts, thank you gifts for his clients. He was a great salesman in this regard. And then there's this story that has become part of our family lore. Many of my father's clients were not the most wholesome folks, and their stores were not in the best neighborhood. They were from families that would call themselves organized business. We may have a different term. One fine day, my father heads back to his car after doing his thing in one of the stores, only to notice that the hood of his car was open and the battery was gone. In the days before cell phones, my father returned to the store that he had just left to call a mechanic. When he told the owner what had happened, the owner immediately told my father to wait a minute, got on the phone, and my father heard this: "Hey, you took Marty's battery. Bring it back." And sure enough, 5 minutes later, the battery was back, and my father was on his way to the next store. Somehow my father managed to make all of these guys his friends. But most of all, I learned that you just work hard. You have responsibilities, and you do what you need to do, without accolades or honors. The importance of this value is expressed in the Midrash that depicts Avraham hoping that his final destination after God told him, Lech Lecha, to go, not be in a place where he saw people idling about, but rather in a place where he saw people committed to work and responsibility. This was a defining character of my father, one that came naturally to him. Something else I learned from my father and saw in my father was his total devotion to my mother. As Gita said, I have a dozen or so voice messages from my father saved on my phone. A number of them are simple reminders from my father to, and now I quote him, "Call your mother, but don't tell her I told you." His devotion to my mother and his Bronx accent are everlasting. As my father's illness progressed and his mental state deteriorated, he would get agitated and sometimes a little belligerent. At times he knew it, and after the fact, he would ask me to call my mother to make sure that she was okay. There's a saying in the Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia, Itetach gutza gachin v'tilchosh. If your wife is short, bend down to hear her whisper. It's true my mother was short. My father was a little taller. But I don't think the Gemara was giving advice on how to tell a husband to better hear what his wife is saying. I think the Gemara is telling us a conceptual posture that a wise husband will follow. Make every effort, the Gemara is saying, to pay attention to your wife. And Gabi mentioned to me yesterday that some of the words she most often heard my father say were, "Okay, Barbara. Time to go to the supermarket. Okay, Barbara. Time to go to the ballet. Okay, Barbara." And if you knew my father, there's no way you could have imagined he really wanted to go to the ballet. I just really think he always wanted to make my mom happy. And my mom showed equal devotion to him, especially this past year. My dad was admitted to the hospital last Pesach, over a year ago, and never returned home. He was back and forth between hospital and 7 Acres for over a year. My mother was with him every single day, except for Shabbat and Yom Tov, and 2 days when she flew to New York for Sam and Dena's wedding. Otherwise, she never missed a day. And I really tried to get her to loosen her schedule a bit, to take a day off. She simply would not. And many times over the last months, my mom would say, "I don't know what else to do. I literally do not think there was anything else that you could have done." Not only was my mother with him every day, she was his advocate, making sure he never forgot his medication, taking him to appointments, and of course, most importantly, making sure he was well fed. Mom, I don't know how else to categorize what you did for Daddy other than heroic. As my sister said, my father was a model of kibud av, of honoring his father. His mother died when he was 13. And as far as I can tell, it was very difficult for his father. But from my earliest memories, my grandfather was old and weak, and my father took care of him. I remember going to see my grandfather with my father almost every Sunday when I was a kid. My father called his father Pa, and I can still hear him say, "Pa, do you have enough food? Pa, are your bills paid?" My grandfather had very few material needs, and I think my father inherited that from him. And my father was completely supportive of me as a kid and as an adult. He was my Little League baseball coach, along with Mr. Torchiner, whose son Neil was on the same team. And I'll never forget my father's first pep talk to us. "All right, kids, it's gonna be a great season. And I just want you to know that that even though me and Mr. Torchiner are the coaches, there's not gonna be any favoritism. Here's the lineup. Barry, you're up first. Neil, you're up second." I have great memories of baseball catches with him in the backyard, basketball one-on-ones, building a sukkah on our deck, walks to shul every Shabbat morning, and long drives to Montreal for Pesach. As an adult, the pride he had in us never changed. He was so proud that I chose the rabbinate and that Gita chose nursing. To have 2 children in the helping professions gave him much pride. I remember driving with my parents to my sister's graduation from nursing school. He was so excited. I know this because instead of using his magic powers to get a parking spot, he decided to go right for the parking lot, which was not easy for him because he wasn't of the big spenders. But he wanted to make sure that he got there in time and got a good seat. On Shabbos, this past Shabbos, when my father died, I was at 7 Acres with my mother, and I noticed that in his tallis bag there was a copy of a speech written by Rabbi Mitch Wahlberg. My father's cousin, Brian Lass, sent it to him because it mentioned an interview that Gabi gave after Hurricane Harvey. Rabbi Wahlberg went on to build his entire drasha around the interview that Gabi had given. And to me, the presence of that drasha in my father's tallis bag symbolized his pride that he had in all of us, including his grandchildren, or especially his grandchildren. As Gabi noted in her Facebook post about my dad, my father was a man of few words because he was satisfied and proud of his family. He rarely felt the need to admonish us or tell us what to do. He personified Ezehu Ashir Asameach Becholko. Who was the rich person? The one who was satisfied with their lot. Rachel and Ari, Rena, Avery, Maya, Sam, Dena, Lily, Ben, Ellie, and Ami, I want you to know that many people have commented to me over the past few days how Zadie's face would light up when he spoke about you. He was just so proud of you and got so much nachas from you. Now, just so this doesn't go to your head, my parents' good friend Yves Borshi put it this way. He always lit up when he was talking about his grandchildren. When it came to Menucha, the wattage was almost blinding. None of us could really hold a candle to her. My father was a great Jewish role model for me. He did not have an extensive Jewish education, and I do not recall him spending a lot of time studying, but he was devout. I can still see him davening with his talis and tefillin every morning in the living room. In fact, this led to a strange story. One day I was playing across the street in my neighbor's home, and I asked the girl who was my age, I must have been 8 or 9, maybe younger, who I was playing with, I said, "Hey, where does your father keep his talis and tefillin?" And she looked at me like I was from Mars. And I kept asking her, "Where does your father keep his talis and tefillin?" It seemed obvious to me, based on the example my father had set, that every father had a pair of tefillin and a talis that they davened with, and they had to keep it somewhere. And she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Finally exacerbated, I just went home. And years later, it occurred to me that the fact that her name was Patty Ann and she was Irish Catholic explained why she did not know what I was saying. My father would regularly thank his doctors and his nurses, and it always amazed me how they all seemed to love him. He had this way with a few words, he was able to charm them. He was especially grateful to them when he had some hard days. And so in this vein, on behalf of our family, I'd like to thank a few people. Dr. Alan Hoffman, who we believe saved my father's life. Before my parents moved here, they were visiting, and my father was sitting behind Dr. Hoffman in shul. And Dr. Hoffman did not like the way my father's breathing sounded. And so he said, "Come into my office tomorrow, come see him the next day." This led to my father getting a defibrillator vest that saved his life many weeks later after he had a heart attack commonly known as the Widowmaker. The staff at 7 Acres Junior Senior Care Services were very kind to my father. On Shabbat, after my father had died, I saw how they extended that care to my mother, comforting her and telling her that she was a good wife and had done all that she could. We have eternal gratitude to Dr. Joggy George for providing my father with exceptional care and for being a source of comfort and guidance throughout his illness. Just to give you a sense of the role that he played in my family, I think at some point my mother started asking him her religious questions as well. We turned to him for every imaginable piece of advice when it came to my father. Always answered his texts and his call, and his phone was always there for us. And there's simply nothing we could ever do to thank him enough. We thank Susan and Jacob Mandel and Jonas Hafkin for visiting with my father when he was in the hospital. We're grateful to Congregation B'rith Shalom for opening your doors for our family today. To Vicki Teller for taking care of so many of the logistical details leading up to today, and for Shiva. Never let anyone say that logistics are not part of pastoral care. And finally, my dear friend, Rabbi Teller, who always seems to show up just when I need him. I'm also grateful to see my colleagues at the JCC here today. Thank you. and rabbis from the Houston Rabbinical Association. If I would tell my father that he excelled in all of these ways, he probably would have sat there wondering what it was about his life that led people to say all of these amazing things. All of these things that I've seen on Facebook and in email and in text messages. Ana laha milta chala bar chamra legabe abba. I am, with regard to all these matters, like vinegar the son of wine with respect to my father. But I am grateful. Dad, I am grateful. Thank you for being the sweetest wine for all of us to enjoy and to aspire to. And finally, I ask you, and the reason my father's casket is not here, I guess we should explain that, is my mother's two nephews from Israel, Arla and Yehuda Roth, flew in specifically to be here with us, and they are Kohanim. So we thought my father would approve so that they could be in here. My father is resting comfortably in the air-conditioned hearse outside. He loved the air conditioning. So I would say in my father's absence that on behalf of the entire family, we ask you for forgiveness if at any time we did not give you the honor, the kavod, the respect that you deserve.
Friends, we invite Penny Rosenthal to recite some Tehillim.
Shir Lamalos, Esainai El Hare Me'anya Vo Ezri. Ezri Me'im Adonai, Osei Shemayim V'aretz. Al Yiten Lamot Raglecha, V'al Yanum Shomrecha. Hinei Lo Yanum V'lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael. Anai Shomrecha, Anai Tzilcha, Al Yad Yeminecha. Yomam HaShemesh Lo Yakeka, V'yareach B'layla. Anai Yishmorcha Mikol Ra, Yishmor et Nafshecha. Anai Yishmor et Tzeitzecha, Uvoecha, Me'atav Yad Olam. A song of ascents. I lift my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot falter. Your guardian will not slumber. Behold, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your protection by your right side. By day the sun will not harm you, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. The Lord will guard your life. The Lord will guard your going and your coming from now and forever.
Rabbi Sprung.
Adon Olamim, Zechor et Moshe et Nishmat Moshe Mendel ben Menachem Nachem, Shalach Lolamo, Bavo Shanach Mipalim Ba'ad Haskar Nishmato, Ana Avrachamim, Paslichoti Nafsho Tzra B'Tzra Chaim, Utehi Menuchato Kavod, V'nomar, Amen.
Friends, donations in memory of Martin Moshe Mendel Ben Menachem Nachum can be made to the Bobby and Vic Samuel Center for Jewish Living and Learning at the ERJCC, to Nora's Home, to 7 Acres Jewish Senior Care Services. Our custom is to do some good in the world, after we heard so much good that Moshe Mendel did. And so we encourage everybody that mitzvah of tzedakah. Following the funeral here, the burial will take place at Beth Jacobs Cemetery, 2300 Alameda Genoa Road. Friends, thank you all for being here. The Shiva Minyanim are on the Google Docs at the Gelman home. Friends, we allow the mourners to recess, and then we'll follow. Tehi nishmatot tzra b'tzra chaim. Together we say Amen.